they've arrested 15 what they call activists and Antifa affinity groups in Minneapolis. They were accused of using debris, vehicles, and other objects to obstruct roads used by federal law enforcement and of wielding homemade shields to resist officers on foot. So the 15 defendants charged with conspiracy to impede or injure a federal officer were Isaac Auman Sant, Emmett James Doyle, Cameron Kennedy, Callum Robinette, Eric Davis, Brian Stillwell Apland, Kyle Wagner, Hannah Margaret Vandewater Davis, Treasure K. Thorson, Nathan Unho Kim, Alex Stewart, Douglas Mistrick, Dustin Scott Beisel, William Morgan, and Natasha Rakotz. William Morgan, a transgender woman who was addressed as Miss Morgan in court, and Mr. Rakotz were also each charged with one count of assault on a federal officer, but Mr. Rosen declined to say during the news conference whether any officers had been injured. Mr. Wagner, who had also been previously arrested on other charges, was also charged with solicitation to commit a crime of violence and interstate threats, which means he just said something online. The internet travels over state lines. Miss Morgan and Mr. Sant were charged with interstate stalking, and Miss Morgan with destruction of government property. This comes after federal prosecutors have been having a hard time getting anything to stick against protesters in Minnesota. And you know why? Because just last month, prosecutors dismissed all charges against 4 protesters accused of interfering with federal agents at an ICE facility in Chicago after the judge in the case discovered an extraordinary series of grand jury violations. They're lying to the grand jury to get them to indict. They're literally saying, he can vouch for me. I'm telling you the truth. There's literally an anti-vouching rule that you can't use as a federal prosecutor. They're the lawless ones. They are breaking the law every day, trying to get indictments against people who just disagree with them politically. While the Trump administration has poured energy into building cases against the Antifa and other left-leaning movements, it's managed, at least so far, to actually file only a handful of charges against them. The most prominent example was the one in Texas, resulting in the conviction in March of a group of young protesters accused of being members of Antifa and taking part in an armed assault at an immigration facility. So this indictment describes defendants as members of an organization called Direct Action Minnesota and subgroups as the Black Cat Workers Collective. The prosecutors said infiltrated and exploited lawful protests to more efficiently carry out its direct actions. Now, they're talking about RRNs, Rapid Response Networks, and I read the indictment, and the language in the indictment is very worrisome because they're trying to set legal framework to continue to go after Democrats and left-leaning individuals who are actively trying to work against this federal government, who are actively trying to protest this federal government, who are actively trying to try to blunt some of the damage of this lawless fucking federal government who is arresting people. How they've arrested a couple 100,000 people, 95% of which do not have criminal records at all. If you haven't seen the View interview with J.D. Vance, you need to watch it right now. Those women ripped him to fucking shreds. Ripped him to fucking shreds. And then threw the shreds in his face. Anyway, NSPM-7, y'all. I've made so many videos about this, and this is what they're doing. It's the framework they're using, an overbroad, newly discovered definition of domestic terrorism that they're using now. They're using the entire framework of 9/11, which includes DHS and ICE, because they were formed after 9/11. They're using the tools of 9/11, and they're warping them into going after political opponents. That's all this is about. I'm not going to condone violence. I'm also going to say that there's a big difference between peaceful protests and nonviolent protests, even though people like to say that they're the same. Many movements who promote philosophies of nonviolence or pacifism have pragmatically adopted the methods of nonviolent action as an effective way to achieve social or political goals. They employ nonviolent resistance tactics such as information warfare, picketing, marches, vigils, leafleting, protest art, protest music, and poetry, community education, and consciousness raising, lobbying, tax resistance, civil disobedience, boycotts, sanctions, legal diplomatic wrestling, underground railroads, principled refusal of awards, honors, and general strikes. Current nonviolent resistance movements include the Jeans Revolution in Belarus, the fight of the Cuban dissidents, and internationally, the Extinction Rebellion and School Strike for Climate. Although nonviolent movements can maintain broader public legitimacy by refraining from violence, some segments of society may perceive protest movements as being more violent than they really are when they disagree with the social goals of the movement. Research also shows that perceived violence of a movement is not only influenced by its tactics, but also by the identity of its participants. For example, protests led or dominated by women are generally seen as less violent than those led by men, though this effect depends on whether the female protesters conform to or challenge traditional gender norms. A great deal of work has addressed the factors that lead to violent mobilization, but less attention has been paid to understanding why disputes become violent or nonviolent, comparing these two things as strategic choices relative to conventional politics. Peaceful protesting is different than nonviolent protesting. Nonviolent protesting can include strikes, sit-ins, boycotts, marches, petitions, and creative civil disobedience. Even symbolic property destruction or tactical rule breaking by activists can fall into this category if it does not injure people. One of the guys who got arrested, he wrote this, one of the social media posts that got him in trouble, where he was talking about, all you motherfuckers out there talking about 3.5% resistance can win. He said, you might as well be QAnon if you fucking believe that. And we have to understand what was happening in Minnesota. People were protecting their neighbors. ICE was using campaigns. They would put out leaflets saying, oh, you can call us and we'll get you groceries. Set them up. Using the fact that they were hiding indoors from them to get them to come out so they could arrest them. They were using some really evil tactics, but what could you expect from an evil regime?